Hi, welcome to part 3 on our subunit related to ancient Near Eastern art. What you're looking at is a postcard of the main excavation site at the city of Ur. This was an archaeological excavation that was undertaken from 1922 to 34 by the British Museum and the University Museum in Pennsylvania. And the lead excavator was Leonard Woolley. You've heard his name. We listened to the podcast related to the Standard of Ore as well as watched a video. I do encourage you to watch those videos that I post in your resource folder from Khan Academy. They're a good way to sort of enhance the textbook and my lectures. And so what you see here again at the center of the settlement were these sort of mud brick temples. And remember, because of the location and the geography of the ancient Near East, they didn't build with stone. They used a lot of mud brick. And what they found, what appears to be, is a cemetery that seems to include burials of royal people, and so this has been known as the royal graves. So I thought this was sort of an interesting little image to start off with. Um, so the royal graves at Ur, and that's what they're often referred to. These were close to temple buildings at the center of the city of Ur. I say Ur sometimes, but I guess you're supposed to say Ur. Sat a rubbish dump built over centuries. So remember, a lot of these sites have been built over. Unable to use the area for building, the people of Ur started to bury their dead there. The cemetery was used between 2600 to 2000 BCE, and hundreds of burials were made in pits. And many of these contained very rich materials. In one area of the cemetery, a group of 16 graves was dated to the mid-3rd millennium. These large shaft graves were distinct from the surrounding burials and consisted of a tomb made of stone, rubble, and brick built at the bottom of the pit. The layout of the tombs varied. Some occupied the entire floor of the pit and had multiple chambers. The most complete tomb discovered belonged to a lady identified as Huabi from the name carved on a cylinder seal found with the burial. And so here you can kind of see this seal right now. And so this is the object, the seal. And then what they would do is that they would roll this onto clay and create this image. So these pictures that they were creating by sort of rolling or stamping the seal into the wet clay is sort of the documents that we are studying to learn more about these cultures. The majority of graves have been robbed in antiquity, but where evidence survived, the main burial was surrounded by many human bodies. One grave had up to 74 such sacrificial victims. It is evident that elaborate ceremonies took place as the pits were filled in that included more human burials and offerings of food and object. The excavator, Leonard Woolley, thought the graves belonged to kings and queens. Another suggestion is that they belonged to the high priestesses of Ur. And so here you can see that this cylinder is actually made of lapis lazuli, which would have been a very rare and precious commodity. So again, this isn't something natural to the geography of the ancient Near East. So this again also shows that they traded and they traded at great distances with other civilizations. So the famous Standard of Ore, this is an object that was found in one of the largest graves in the Royal Cemetery at Ur, lying in the corner of a chamber above the right shoulder of a man. Its original function is not yet understood. Sumerians depended a great deal on the ability to trade. While they were rich in fertile soil and water, they lacked precious materials like metal and stone, and precious stones like lapis lazuli and marble. So the Sumerian work in this slide is made up of such precious materials, and again sort of signifies this sort of trading with other civilizations. Again, Leonard Woolley, the excavator at Ur, imagined that it was carried on a pole as a standard, hence its common name. It's really not a standard. I mean, He just imagined that's what its function was, but it's not. We're not exactly sure of its function. Some people think it might have been used as a sound box. Other historians think it might have been a box to store precious things. Um, so, um, but the standard has remained part of the title. When found, the original wooden frame for the mosaic of shells, red limestone, and lapis lazuli had decayed, and the two main panels had been crushed together by the weight of the soil. The bitumen, acting as glue, remember this is a kind of tar-like material that they used. We saw them use it when they were putting shell into the eyes of the votive figures that we saw at Telesmar. And so the bitumen acting as glue had also disintegrated, and the ends of the panels were broken. As a result, the present restoration is only a best guess of how it originally appeared. So there are two main panels. One is known as War and the other is Peace. Each side is divided into three horizontal bands or registers. That's an important vocabulary term for you guys to remember. It really is a good example of a narrative because it does read from left to right and from bottom to top. And we talked about this in class. The mosaics on the standard depict life in early Mesopotamia. The two sides, dubbed the war side and the peace side, tell a story read from bottom to top. The top registers on each side depict a king who is larger in scale than the other figures. The standard shows the two most important roles of an early Mesopotamian ruler. The warrior who protected the people and secured access to water and natural resources, and the leader who served as an intermediary between the people and the gods. So this gets back to this idea of a theocracy, that politics and religion and government coexisted together. They weren't separate. The feast panel depicts animals, fish, and other goods brought in procession to a banquet. Seated figures wearing woolen fleeces or fringed skirts drink to the accompaniment of a musician playing a lyre, which you can see up here in the top register. In the lower register, we see men carrying provisions or possibly war booty on their backs. So these are probably laborers or maybe lower class soldiers. Above, we see attendants in the second register bringing animals and fish for the great banquet being depicted above. The uppermost register portrays what appear to be seated dignitaries. And then we have this larger figure here, which we talked about in class, who is most likely the king. And then obviously the lyre player is, and there's a singer also as well, entertaining this group of dignitaries. And this also might be a banquet that is possibly connected to some sort of cult ritual, maybe something that they do after winning a war. The two lower registers illustrate the bounty of the land. The bottom one depicts men carrying produce in bags on their shoulders in backpacks supported by headbands, as well as men leading these animals by ropes that are helping to carry the provisions. The second register shows men leading bulls and sheep and goats and carrying fish, presumably the produce of the pastures, rivers, and swamps. So this again is a narrative device to sort of talk about the bounty of the land and how rich and fertile this area of Mesopotamia was. And again, the upper registers depict a royal banquet. The ruler wearing a kilt composed of tufts of wool, again, is shown larger in life and larger in scale than the others. This is known as hierarchic scale. Um, and then we see the other banqueters who also wear a similar costume, but not as fancy as our king here. And they're sort of toasting. There looks like they're holding some sort of drink and sort of toasting the king. And then again, we know because of this that obviously banquets in Mesopotamia involved music, because we do see this lyre player and a singer depicted in the upper register as well. So you can get a better sense, because I know it's hard to see in the slides. But here you see this lapis lazuli. This is supposed to be the red marble. So, in addition to being a warrior, the city state's ruler was considered an intermediary between the gods and their people or his people. One of the major responsibilities was to build and maintain the temples of the city's gods and goddesses, a responsibility that included provisioning their cults. So, in doing this, it guaranteed the fertility of the land, which the standards peace side really vividly illustrates that. And so here you can see this guy carrying fish. It's really quite charming. The other side of this object, we have what's considered the war side of the standard of war. And this shows the defeat of some unknown enemy. At the bottom, we see war carts drawn by ongers. It's spelled Onagers, and this is a type of donkey. Um, and we can see too, it's really beautifully depicted how they start off kind of slow, and then it seems like they're racing and sort of building up speed, and they're sort of mowing down the enemy here. And again, it's really an interesting way of depicting depth as well. You can kind of see how they've repeated the legs to sort of suggest that, one horse or one donkey is in front of the other. And so you can see these donkeys sort of increasing with speed from left to right, trampling the naked enemy soldiers, and they are depicted in the nude. Remember, we talked about nudity. Usually, people of lower class were depicted in the nude. The second register shows this this row of armed soldiers to the left, while on the right we see soldiers in a variety of poses dispatched. And we also see some of the captives, and they're sort of leading these captives, I guess, to be presented as slaves to the figure at the top. The top register shows the ruler, his height exceeding the border. So again, we saw him sort of breaking the border, and that's sort of signifying him as being important. It also was a similar device being used on the peace side as well. We see his cart. So this is his personal cart. And again, it's drawn by 4 donkeys alongside his attendants. And in the front of him, again, we see soldiers that parade nude and bound prisoners. So this theme of war shows us one of the earliest representations of a Sumerian army. Chariots, each pulled by 4 donkeys, trample enemies. We see this infantry with cloaks, carrying spears. There's a lot of details that we can sort of see through these pictures and this narrative that gives us a sense of the history and the culture of um, what Sumerian armies and war life was like. We see enemy soldiers, and they've been killed with axes. And again, others are paraded naked and presented to the king. And we can also see him holding a spear or some sort of staff, again, indicating his importance. And here you can see these are the soldiers intermingled with the captives, and you can see how the soldiers are depicted clothed, and the captives are bound and nude. And here's a detail of the cart and it mowing down one of the enemies. And again, I just love the way they've depicted the sort of this idea of depth with the repetition of the legs of the horse. Millennium BCE, southern Mesopotamia was organized into 20 or 30 city-states consisting of urban centers, towns, villages, and hamlets. A hamlet is sort of like a little agricultural village. Each city-state had its principal guardian deity. Or's patron was Nana, the moon god. Officially, the city-state was the deity's property. These deities chose and nurtured the city-state's ruler, whose title varied from place to place. Lugal, literally big man, was one title. For their part, city-state rulers acted on the deity's behalf, even on the battlefield. So again, there's this idea of the ruler being um, this this uh, this kind of intermediary figure between his people and the gods. And Lugal, that's the name or title of the ruler, is spelled Lugal. And there are sources that provide evidence of peaceful cooperation among city-states. They also equally record conflicts, and that's why you see, and what you'll see in this area, that you'll see these groups, fight and come to power, and then another group comes in and takes over. And so this geographical part of the Middle East really was very turbulent, and their way of life was much more chaotic than we will see when we look at Egyptian life in our next subunit. So the standard of is important because it really shows us these graphic illustrations of these battles and their aftermaths. And again, is a way of documenting the history of this culture. Um, here I should have been talking, but here you have the ruler, or one of the dignitaries depicted here, and then you have the singer and the lyre player. And this is another object I wanted to show you that was also found in the royal tombs at Ur. And this is an actual lyre, a musical instrument. It's very similar to a harp. It has been reconstructed, so not all of it. It wasn't found this way intact. But again, you can see the use of the inlay, the mosaic, and we see this figure of a bull. Bull imagery, it becomes very important. A lot of bulls or bulls were often used to represent some deities in Mesopotamian culture as well as Egyptian. And it's really quite a beautiful object. So this was another piece that was found that I thought y'all would be interested in seeing. I post my lecture notes. You can, if you want to read in more detail about this instrument, you can. I'm not going to talk about it, but because it's not one of your official works, but it's a good one for you guys to be familiar with. So overall, when we are looking at the standard of Ur in terms of thinking about stylistic conventions, one of the things I want you to remember about this piece is the use of hierarchic scale, with the registers, reading from the bottom up, and then, figures in terms of status are portrayed, lower class citizens in the bottom register, middle class in the middle, and upper class in the high register. Again, this idea of larger figures signaling importance. Also, the sequential ordering of the story. And again, this is a good example of a continuous narrative. It's almost like a comic strip. And this is achieved by the use of these registers. I'm going to stop here. In the next part, 4, we'll be looking at Babylonian art and hopefully some Assyrian art as well.